My name is Evelyn Brooks. I am 33 years old. 4 years ago, my mother-in-law learned I had kept my grandmother's inheritance separate and immediately began poisoning my husband against me by saying I was not a team player. Now, in the mediation room at the attorney's office in Missoula, my mother-in-law smiles triumphantly while my husband demands I surrender the house, the business, and all assets we built over 12 years of marriage, claiming our son would be better with them. I knew the financial secrets I had guarded for 4 years were about to backfire on them, but with her influence, I feared losing more than money. Yet I resolved to fight smart and protect what mattered most, my son and my dignity. If you have ever had a mother-in-law who turned your own family against you in the middle of a crisis, hit that like button and tell me in the comments what your in-law did to make you feel this small. I read everyone. The air in that small mediation room felt thick enough to choke on, but I kept my face calm. My mother-in-law, Joan Thompson, sat right next to my husband, Thomas Thompson, like she owned the table. She had insisted on being there, even though it was supposed to be just us and the lawyers. That was her first move today, and it set the tone. She leaned forward, eyes locked on me, and delivered the opening blow with that sweet venom she always saved for family gatherings. You have been dragging my son down for 12 years, Evelyn. It is time you stopped pretending you ever contributed anything real to this family. The house, the business, everything belongs with people who actually built, not someone who just played along. My husband shifted but said nothing. He never did when she spoke. My stomach twisted, but I stayed silent, letting her think she had won already. That was the whole point. I had learned the hard way that the best way to beat my mother-in-law was to let her believe she was untouchable. Let me take you back so you understand how we reached this moment. I met my husband when I was 18, fresh out of high school and working as a part-time office administrator at a small medical clinic here in Missoula. He was 24, charming, and full of big dreams about starting his own home renovation business. We got married when I was 19, and our son Ezra came along the next year. I kept my clinic job part-time while raising him and helping my husband with the books because he said he trusted me completely. For the next 11 years, I poured everything into that business. I handled the scheduling, the client calls, the invoices, and the payroll, all while managing our home and making sure Ezra never felt the strain. My official title stayed wife, but everyone in our small Missoula circles knew I was the one keeping the operation running. My husband got the awards and the handshakes at Chamber of Commerce events. I got the late nights and the thank yous that never quite reached his eyes. My mother-in-law made sure I knew my place from the beginning. She would visit unannounced and comment on how the house looked lived in or how my clothes seemed a little too practical for a wife supporting a growing business. Then 4 years ago, everything changed. I was reconciling the company accounts one quiet Tuesday night while my husband was out at yet another late meeting. A transfer caught my eye, then another. I dug deeper, staying up until 3 a.m, following the paper trail. What I found made my hands shake. The house we lived in had 3 separate mortgages totaling $1,100,000 owed, while its actual value sat at only $750,000. The business itself was drowning under $480,000 in combined lines of credit, back taxes, and vendor debts. Even the 2 trucks were leased with balloon payments due soon. We were underwater by nearly $300,000 overall, and none of it showed on the surface. The money had vanished into cryptocurrency bets that never paid off, gambling losses, an apartment my husband kept on the side for someone I did not know at the time, and lavish trips and watches that never made it home to me. I sat there surrounded by printouts and realized the empire everyone envied was built on borrowed cards that were already on fire. My first instinct was to confront him, but I knew my mother-in-law would hear about it within hours and twist it against me. She had always viewed me as temporary help, not family. So instead, I protected myself the way my grandmother taught me. I moved my inheritance of $300,000 and my rolled over retirement account of $150,000 into an irrevocable trust for Ezra. My name was not even listed as beneficiary to keep it completely untouchable. Then I documented every single debt, every hidden account, every suspicious transaction, and stored copies with my trusted colleague Penelope Ramirez at the clinic and in a safe deposit box. I waited. I smiled at family dinners. I laughed at my mother-in-law's pointed jokes about how some wives just did not have the drive their husbands needed. 4 years of perfect acting while the hole got deeper. When my husband finally came home one evening and announced he wanted a divorce, I almost laughed out loud because he was not asking for assets, he was demanding liabilities, and he had no idea. But my mother-in-law was right there the very next morning to make sure the message was clear. She arrived at our house with her perfectly styled hair and that practiced look of concern. She patted my hand across the kitchen table and said the words that still echo in my head. Men have needs, dear, and you stopped meeting them years ago. My son deserves joy, not this half-life you have given him. I will help you pack so we can keep things civil for Ezra. She did not ask. She started pulling open drawers, deciding what I deserved to keep and what stayed as marital assets. Old clothes fine, family photos, some of them. My grandmother's recipe box, she hesitated over that one, like she might claim it for herself before shoving it into a garbage bag. Anything of value, jewelry, furniture, even the good dishes, those were off limits. She packed my things like trash, and all the while she kept up the running commentary. You never really contributed anyway, Evelyn. The business was always my son's vision. You just filed the paperwork. Let us not make this uglier than it needs to be. My husband stood in the doorway watching and said nothing. That silence hurt more than her words. I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment with Ezra 2 weeks later. The place was half the size of our old house and the boxes barely fit, but it was mine. Meanwhile, my husband started bringing Aurora Collins around. She was 27, worked at one of his job sites, and had that effortless confidence my mother-in-law praised constantly. Aurora walked into my old kitchen like she already owned it, wearing my apron while making smoothies in my blender. My mother-in-law would stop by to visit Ezra and make sure I saw how happy they looked together. See, Evelyn, this is what a real partner looks like. Aurora understands how to support a man without dragging him down. The humiliation built daily. First, my personal credit card got cancelled, then the joint one. Then my mother-in-law suggested I find somewhere else to stay while things got sorted, even though the apartment was already my reality. She came over again to help me finish packing the last items, and by help, I mean she went through everything one more time, deciding what stayed behind. Through it all, I had one person I thought I could trust, my best friend Lila Parker. We had been close since high school, 20 years of history. She came over with takeout, listened to me cry, and told me I deserved better. But little things started to feel off. My husband seemed to know my plans before I made them. When I mentioned to Lila that I was thinking of fighting harder for more time with Ezra the next day, my son came home repeating my husband's exact words about how it would not work. When I told Lila I was looking at a different neighborhood for a bigger place, my husband made a comment about that exact area being too expensive for someone like me. It clicked one afternoon when I saw a text on Lila's phone while she was in the bathroom. She had been feeding him information the whole time. 20 years of friendship sold out for the hope that once I was gone, she might have a chance with him. My mother-in-law had encouraged it, of course. She always knew how to use people. The worst part was watching Ezra pull away. My 13-year-old son saw the girlfriend that packed garbage bags the way his father looked at me like I was already gone. My mother-in-law worked on him too, dripping poison in his ear every visit. Your mother is making this so difficult, Ezra. She is the one dragging things out. Your father just wants everyone to be happy, but she will not cooperate. Ezra started answering my questions with one-word replies. Not angry, exactly, just distant and confused. I hired a lawyer, Mateo Scott, recommended by an old contact from my clinic days. He was sharp, no nonsense, and when I laid the 3 binders of evidence on his desk, his expression changed from concern to something like respect. I told him the plan. I would pretend to be defeated, ask for almost nothing, and let my mother-in-law and my husband think they had won. Mateo warned me it was risky, especially with her influence in our small town, but I had waited 4 years. I was ready. The next 3 months were an acting masterclass. I showed up to every meeting with red eyes and trembling hands. I spoke softly, asking for only $30,000, cashed my personal belongings, and shared the custody of Ezra. My mother-in-law beamed at the mediation table like she had orchestrated the perfect outcome. Finally showing some sense, Evelyn, my son can move forward now without the dead weight. My husband signed the preliminary papers quickly, barely glancing at them. Aurora redecorated the old house, painting the kitchen a cold gray that made my stomach turn. Leila kept calling, pretending concern, but really fishing for details. I fed her just enough to keep my mother-in-law relaxed. Ezra noticed the disconnect, though. One evening in my tiny apartment, he looked at me across the second-hand table and asked quietly if his father was actually as successful as everyone claimed. I squeezed his hand and told him to trust me just a little longer. Behind the scenes, Mateo prepared the addendum, the liability disclosure that listed every debt in black and white. When my husband signed for all the assets, he would be signing for all the liabilities too. My mother-in-law pushed hard for speed, saying there was no need for extra reviews. She even sat in on one call with the lawyers and said the words that sealed it. My son knows his own business better than any accountant. We do not need delays, just final papers. The day of the final hearing arrived, and my mother-in-law was there in the gallery, dressed like she was attending a victory party. She gave me that little smile again, the one that said she had already won. I looked back at her and felt the resolve settle in my bones. She had no idea what she was really inheriting. But as the clerk passed around the final documents, I caught a glimpse of something in her expression that made my stomach drop. She was whispering to my husband, pointing at one page and smiling wider. I realized in that moment she might have known more about the debts than I thought. The trap I had spent 4 years building suddenly felt like it might close on the wrong person. My mother-in-law did not even wait for the judge to speak again. She leaned forward from the gallery and cut in with that calm, poisonous tone she reserved for moments when she wanted to remind everyone who really ran the family. Your Honor, my son has carried this entire load for 12 years. My daughter-in-law here only ever handled the easy parts, and now she wants to walk away pretending she built anything real. It is only right that the house, the business, and every asset go to him so our grandson can have stability instead of the chaos she created. Judge Elizabeth Carter gave a sharp warning about gallery comments, but the damage was already done. My husband let out a forced, awkward laugh, trying to play it off as nothing, then suddenly turned on her with a defensive outburst that shocked the whole room. Mom, that is enough, he snapped at her first, his voice rising in a way I had never heard before. Then just as fast he pivoted and redirected the frustration straight at me, his eyes narrowing with unexpected anger. But you know what? Evelyn, if you had not kept so many secrets from the beginning, we would not be sitting here at all. You always held back. And now it is too late for any of us. The rapid flip from standing up to his mother to blaming me left the air thick with tension. My lawyer sat beside me stone-faced while my husband's lawyer shifted papers uncomfortably. The judge called for order and the signing continued page by page. When it reached the liability disclosure, listing the $1,100,000 in mortgages on the house, the $480,000 in business debts, and the lease obligations on the vehicles, my mother-in-law spoke up again from her seat, initiating another jab before anyone could stop her. Sign it, Thomas. We have gone over this. Any problems are hers to answer for because she managed the books for so long. Let us finish this so our family can finally move forward without her dragging us down. My husband signed the pages, but his hand shook slightly on the final line. The gavel came down and the marriage was officially dissolved. I should have felt a wave of relief, but instead, a cold knot formed in my stomach as my mother-in-law caught my eye across the room and mouthed words I could not hear but understood perfectly. She believed she had won and she was already planning the next move. Outside the courthouse, my husband's girlfriend waited, but my mother-in-law reached her first, speaking in low tones about patience and the sacrifices needed for the family's new chapter. My best friend tried to approach me with her usual fake concern, asking how I was holding up, but I walked past her to where my trusted colleague Penelope Ramirez waited with my son. Penelope had held the backup copies of every document for the last 4 years, and she was the only person outside my lawyer who knew the full scope of what I had planned. She squeezed my arm and whispered that she had already heard whispers around town from people my mother-in-law had contacted, spinning the story that I was the one who caused all the problems. That evening, back in my small apartment, my son sat at the kitchen table, looking more distant than ever. He had just come from a short visit with his father and grandmother, and the change in him was obvious. Mom, my grandmother called me on the way home. She said the hearing went well and that Dad will probably get more time with me because you agreed to almost nothing. She said I should start thinking about packing some clothes to stay with them more often. Is that true? The words landed like a fresh cut. My mother-in-law had used a simple everyday phone call during his walk home to plant the seed, and the way she timed it felt calculated to hit me where it hurt most. I pulled my son into a hug and told him nothing was final, but the doubt in his eyes told me the poison was already spreading. He asked quietly if I had really kept secrets from his father about the money, and I could hear my mother-in-law's voice echoing behind every question. The following 2 weeks, the pressure mounted in ways I had not fully anticipated. Creditors started calling the old house, and my husband's girlfriend began pulling back from public posts, but my mother-in-law went into full defense mode. She reached out to local business contacts and Chamber of Commerce friends, painting me as the unreliable one who had let the family down. Penelope stopped by one afternoon during her lunch break from the clinic and told me she had overheard a conversation at a community event where my mother-in-law was telling people I had hidden the financial issues on purpose to trap my husband later. I met with my lawyer a few days later and he confirmed that the debts had transferred exactly as planned, but he also dropped a piece of information that made my chest tighten. My mother-in-law had apparently known about some of the larger mortgages for 2 years. She had even encouraged my husband to take them out, thinking the business would turn around quickly. The financial trap had worked, but she was already positioning herself to shield him and shift every bit of blame onto me in our small town. One night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, but I knew it was from her. It read that if I did not stop talking to people about the divorce details, she would make sure my son heard the version where I was the one who destroyed the family from the inside. The threat hung there heavy and specific, timed perfectly to arrive while my son was asleep in the next room. For the first time in 4 years, I wondered if my careful plan had backfired in the one way I could not afford. The next morning, my phone rang and it was my mother-in-law initiating the call herself with that same calm tone that always hid the knife. She did not even bother with hello. She went straight for the jugular, saying she had spoken to Ezra after the hearing, and he had confessed how confused he felt about all the secrets I had kept from his father. You owe it to him to step back now, Evelyn. My grandson needs stability, not more of your games. My son and I are prepared to file for primary custody if you force this any further. Think about what is best for the boy instead of your pride. Her words cut deep because they came wrapped in concern for Ezra, but I knew the real motive. She wanted full control, and she was using my son as the lever. I tried to respond, but she cut me off with another jab laced with long-held resentment. You never truly belonged in this family anyway. 12 years and you still acted like an outsider, hoarding your little inheritance while the rest of us sacrificed. Sign the updated papers Mateo Scott sent over or watch your son pull away completely. The choice is yours, but we both know which one a real mother would make. I hung up with my hands trembling and called my lawyer immediately. Mateo confirmed the papers were a new motion from my husband's side, pushing for more custody based on claims that I had withheld financial information and created instability. My mother-in-law had clearly been the one feeding the details to their lawyer, David Morgan, because the motion referenced specifics only she could have known about the trust I set up for Ezra. The hidden truth hit me then. She had known about the debts longer than I realized, and she had encouraged them, hoping my husband would succeed so she could keep the lifestyle she loved. When it all collapsed, she simply pivoted to blame me entirely, and now she was using the court to finish what the divorce had started. That afternoon, I met with Mateo in his office, and the discussion turned into the painful turning point I had dreaded. He laid out the options. I could fight the motion, but it would drag on for months, drain the $30,000 settlement I had received, and risk Ezra being pulled into more interviews where my mother-in-law's influence would shape his answers. Or I could agree to a modified custody arrangement, giving my husband and her primary physical custody with me getting every other weekend. The business was already defaulting on payments, and Aurora had moved out after one particularly heated argument with my mother-in-law about the mounting bills, but none of that mattered to them anymore. They had shifted the narrative in our small Missoula community so successfully that even some of my old clinic clients were whispering about how I had let the family down. I sat across from Mateo, weighing the lesser evil, and the regret already tasted bitter. My mother-in-law had won the social battle, and now she was winning the family one too. Ezra came home from school that day quieter than ever, and when I asked about his day, he finally broke. Grandma John called the school office to check on me. She said I could stay with them full-time if things got too hard here. Mom, is that what you want? Because Dad just changed the subject when I asked him, but I could tell he was angry about the whole hearing. His question forced the decision to keep him from being torn apart by her constant interference and my husband's unpredictable flips between defending her one moment and redirecting blame at me the next. I chose the painful sacrifice. I told Mateo to accept the modified custody. Ezra would live primarily with his father and my mother-in-law, while I kept every other weekend and one evening a week. It was not the clean break or the protected future I had planned for 4 years. It was defeat wrapped in the illusion of cooperation, and my mother-in-law knew it. The papers were signed 2 days later in a quick courthouse follow-up. My mother-in-law was not in the gallery this time, but her presence lingered through the updated agreement she had clearly helped draft. As I left the building alone, my best friend Lila tried one last time to reach out, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. She had chosen sides long ago. Penelope Ramirez met me outside, instead offering a quiet coffee, and a reminder that at least the trust for Ezra remained untouched. Yet even that small victory felt hollow, because my son would now grow up under her roof, hearing her version of events every single day. The collapse I had engineered happened exactly as expected within the next month. The business folded under the weight of the debts, the house went into short sale, and my husband found himself meeting with bankruptcy attorneys, while my mother-in-law publicly framed it all as my fault in her church group and neighborhood circles. She even reached out once more through a text that read, she was sorry things had to end this way, but some people simply were not cut out for the long haul. The sarcasm dripped from every word, and it was the final jab that confirmed she remained untouched by any real consequence. My husband leaned on her completely, and Ezra started calling their house home in a way that made my weekend visits feel like guest appearances. I enrolled in interior design courses at the community college using part of the settlement, but the dream felt muted now. My first small client was a woman named Sophia Ellis, who had just gone through her own messy separation. And when she asked how I started over, I could only tell her one room at a time, while hiding the ache that my own family room was no longer mine. Ezra turned 14 a few months later, and during one of our evenings together, he hugged me tighter than usual, but then pulled back and said my mother-in-law had suggested he focus more on sports at their house because it built character. The quiet distance grew, and I realized the social isolation she had engineered was complete. I had protected the money, but I had lost the daily connection with my son in the process. One evening, about 6 months after the final papers, I sat in my apartment looking at my grandmother's recipe box on the shelf and felt the full weight of the defeat. I had waited 4 years, played the perfect role of the defeated wife, and walked away thinking I would emerge stronger. Instead, my mother-in-law had turned my plan against me, using Ezra as the ultimate leverage and leaving me with every other weekend visits and a heart that still ached every time his voice sounded a little more distant on the phone. The lesson burned deep. Sometimes the longest game ends not in triumph, but in the quiet acceptance that protecting your dignity can cost you the very person you are fighting for. I chose myself, but the price was a loneliness I had not prepared for, and my mother-in-law remained the center of the family I once called mine. Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. It still hurts to tell, but sharing it feels like the only way to breathe again. If you have ever faced a mother-in-law who used your child as a weapon to keep control, what choice did you make when fighting back meant losing time with them? Tell me in the comments, because I still wonder if there was another path I missed.